So Phil, it's a delight to welcome you to this webinar, and we're so happy that you could be in the chair that you're in at the Center for Maritime Mariner Advocacy. As many of you might know, until relatively recently, it was called the Center for Seafarers' Rights, and the longtime holder of that chair was Douglas Stevenson. Who has done such a wonderful job over so many years, and now has passed on the baton to Phil to pick up that work. Phil, I'd like to hear from you. Could you tell us a bit about your background, about why working for the Center for Mariner Advocacy is important to you, and a few of the priorities for your work in the coming year?
Sure. Thank you, Jason, for that very kind of introduction. So let me just kind of start with how I ended up here as a beginning, and then talk a little bit about what I hope to do in this position. So I did serve 30 years in the Coast Guard. How did I end up in the Coast Guard? You know, my father was a mechanic. My mother was in retail. So mom and dad were not going to pay for college. So I had to find a different way to pay for college. And for those that are aware, the United States has military service academies. Probably the most famous of those are West Point, Annapolis. But in this deal, you get to go to school for free, and then you owe a commitment afterwards, a 5-year commitment to serve in the military after going to school. So I thought I'd do one of the service academies. And while I was in high school, I met a retired Coast Guard admiral who told me there was a Coast Guard Academy. I did not know that the Coast Guard Academy existed, and started talking about the missions of the United States Coast Guard. And while I certainly view service in any branch of the military to be important, I found it really attractive that a lot of the Coast Guard missions were focused on helping people. While the other 4 branches of the United States military, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, are trained to do missions that they hope they never have to do. Unfortunately, I had to do too much in the recent past with the various wars that had to be fought. But the reality is, we don't want to go to war. We maintain the military because sometimes you have to go to war. The Coast Guard has missions that we want to do all the time. Search and rescue, where you have the opportunity to go out and save a life, is a mission you want to do. If somebody's in distress, an opportunity to respond to something you want to do. So I found the fact that the Coast Guard had lots of peacetime missions very attractive. So I decided, if I'm going to serve in a military branch for 5 years, why don't I serve in one where I'm going to help people? And that's what the requirement is. When they send you to school for 4 years, you're required to serve for 5 years afterwards. Well, those 5 years turned into 30 years because I really did enjoy the Coast Guard mission and enjoyed the opportunity to help people. And amongst those 30 years, I had the opportunity to command a Coast Guard cutter. I had the opportunity to command a Coast Guard sector. That's our shore command, where you're the captain of the port. I did that down in New Orleans. The Coast Guard kind enough to send me to law school, where I became an attorney and then practiced law for the Coast Guard as well. So I kind of went back and forth between legal assignments and operational assignments. Operational being command the cutters or the sectors, and legal assignments doing various work. In one of those legal assignments, I was fortunate enough to be assigned to the Office of Maritime and International Law in Washington, D.C. In that office, we would often negotiate and advise on the negotiation of different international treaties and instruments at IMO, the International Maritime Organization, or ILO, the International Labor Organization. It was my office. I was responsible for giving that legal advice, and I was one of the people that did that. And occasionally we would travel to the IMO to actually work as part of the U.S. delegation and advise the other members of the delegation when various different legal issues arose. In one of those trips, I was fortunate enough to travel along with Doug Stevenson while he was serving as a public sector advisor to the Coast Guard in the U.S. delegation, and he was employed by Siemens Church Institute as the director of the Center for Seafarers' Rights. I remember talking to Doug about his job and thinking, whenever my Coast Guard career comes to an end, that'd be a really cool job if you get it. But honestly, there weren't that many jobs like Doug's around, so I certainly wasn't holding my breath for the opportunity, but I certainly saw what he did as being what I would deem very personally rewarding. Doug was always very gracious with his time and was willing to advise U.S. delegation on whatever issues came up, but it's clear his passion was on those issues that were advancing kind of the seafarers' rights, seafarers' equities, and that's where his heart was. His passion was for helping people, and that was again one of the reasons I joined the Coast Guard. So I found that as kind of an intrigue opportunity if something like that ever presented itself. So fast forward to the end of my Coast Guard career, and it comes to my attention that Doug had actually retired and that opportunity was available. So I did apply for a number of different positions, lots of opportunities that were presented themselves, but this opportunity was the one that I was certainly most excited for. The opportunity to use my experiences in the Coast Guard, as being familiar with the IMO, familiar with the ILO, familiar with kind of different issues that impacted seafarers, familiar with at least the domestic agencies here in the United States that might negatively impact seafarers' rights, whether it's the Coast Guard, CBP, regulations promulgated by those agencies or laws passed by the Congress. I was familiar with all those processes, and I thought I could bring those talents and experiences to bear to advance the interests of seafarers. So I applied for the position, was fortunate enough to be hired. So I honestly can't be more excited than to be in this position. Like Jason mentioned, I've been here since November, so approaching 3 months point. Not very long when compared to the 29 years of experience that Doug walked out the door with. Doug's been very gracious with his experience. Made himself available to me anytime I had a question. I've certainly emailed him and called him when various issues came up, and it's nice to be able to tap into that vast network of experience and continue to do the great work he's done. So when I talk about Doug Stevenson, the great work he did, if you think, for those of you who've been involved in this work, back 30 years ago, when Doug first started, there was no Maritime Labor Convention of 2006. Seafarers have, for as long as they've been seafarers, been a very vulnerable population. I mean, when we think of blue water mariners, these people who often come from, especially at the deck level, low engineering level, might come from lower socioeconomic areas, and they're on board a ship that usually flying a flag not from their home country, and they might find themselves in a port, usually not the home country. And owners of ships, like owners of most companies, if they come in financial distress, do what a lot of companies do, and they quit paying their bills. They try and conserve cash for what they think is the most critical things that need to use that cash for. And that's usually, unfortunately, not paying their seafarers' wages, and often not continuing to provide provisionings for those vessels. So if you look at the kind of the history of seafarers' rights issues, a lot of times things rose because an owner gets in financial stress and they quit paying the bills. And now you have these foreign seafarers in a foreign port on a ship that's no longer provide provisions and no way to get home. That's the world that we're in, and unfortunately sometimes we're still in now. But if you look back 30 years ago, we didn't have an overarching convention like the Maritime Labor Convention of 2006. You had various different conventions put forward by ILO that often weren't well ratified and didn't have a whole lot of enforcement weight behind it. Well, Doug, along with a lot of other people, over the last 30 years, have really improved that with the Maritime Labor Convention of 2006. You now have a comprehensive convention that has been ratified by a lot of the tonnage and has provisions in it that make it have teeth even on for those countries that have not ratified it. It still has impacts on those countries and on vessels that sail under the flag for countries that ratify. The way this instrument is set up, it still has teeth behind it. So it's improved the world dramatically. I'm not saying it's perfect, as COVID has certainly demonstrated. Our seafarers still have challenges and still work to be done. And so one of the areas I'm going to focus on is trying to continue to carry on the great work Doug has done. That is, continue to advance those seafarers' rights, the blue water marine issues that we're all certainly aware of, fair living conditions on the ship, reasonable access to medical care, make sure that the food is adequate, that wages are paid, that they have seafarer employment agreements, continue to advance those issues. And I certainly would like your help on that. I mean, as we go through this COVID environment, we're seeing areas where the Maritime Labor Commission of 2006 has not been able to adequately respond to the different challenges that our mariners have faced. Please help me identify those issues. I think it's hard while we're here in the heat of battle, so to say, to change international instruments to deal with those. So there's certainly lots of advocacy going on behalf of seafarers, imploring charterers and ship owners and nations to act in ways that will relieve some of these challenges seafarers are facing. But it'd be nice if we can also address some of these by maybe modification of international instruments. So help them identify those issues. And then once we move through the pandemic, trying to make adjustments to either MLC 2006 at the ILO or various different instruments at the IMO that might help us be better prepared for the next pandemic. Hopefully we don't have to deal with it again for 100 years or so, but we should take the lessons that we learned here and shortcomings trying to roll them in. So I'd ask those on this call who deal with these issues as part of professional help, identify those issues, communicate with me. Jason kind of have to put my contact information up there. Let me know what those issues are, and then maybe we might be able to improve those international instruments like Doug has done and others over the last 30 years to improve the world of the seafarers and improve it going forward. So in a macro sense, my role is to advocate on behalf of seafarers' rights at those international bodies, the ILO, the IMO, and then domestically with the US Coast Guard, Congress, CBP, and try to advance their issues and relieve those things that are challenging them. But I mentioned earlier that Doug was the director of the Center for Seafarers' Rights, and it was based in Newark, New Jersey. The position's name was changed to Director for Center Mariner Advocacy and is relocated to New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, for those that aren't too familiar with the those different ports, the port of New York and Newark is really heavily a blue water port. And this, when I say blue water, I mean kind of the international seafarers that trade around the world, as opposed to a brown water port. And when I say brown water, I'm kind of talking about the towing vessels that trade in the inland river system of the United States. New Orleans really is both. New Orleans has a strong brown water nexus to it, since the whole river system kind of flows through the New Orleans area. And we also have an intercoastal waterway that runs from Brownsville, Texas, over to the Panhandle of Florida, and that interacts with the Mississippi River here. So that's really kind of the heart and soul of the brown water industry is there. There's certainly brown water stuff going on in other parts of the world. And I don't want to discount other parts of the United States, discount that, but about 80% of the brown water industry operates on that river system we just described. And the blue water port, obviously, for the Mississippi River. So the reason we're located here is the Seamen's Church Institute wanted to continue to do the work that we do on the blue water mariners, but also begin to take a harder look at what are the issues that are affecting the brown water mariners here in the United States and how can we advocate better for them. So to do that more effectively, it thought it made sense to be located in a brown water port and then to change the name to Center for Mariner Advocacy, since mariners kind of capture the whole world of mariners, whether it's blue water mariner or a brown water mariner. We say the seafarer really has a much more of a blue water mariner feel and an international seafarer type feel. So that's the reason for the change, but also broader type of issues. While Doug certainly would look at the other marine issues as they popped up, he really is focused on kind of the hardcore seafarers' rights issues, the type of thing we talked about earlier, the fair payment of wages, fair living conditions, abandonment type cases, et cetera. I also want to expand to deal with kind of just general wellness issues, whether it's physical wellness, mental wellness, et cetera, and advocate on behalf of those issues. So again, if you think of marine advocacy issues, if it can fall in that bin, I'm interested in it. And to be clear, I'm interested in hearing from you and working for you. I am a employee of Seaman's Church Institute, but I'm a resource for all of you. And I want to advocate on behalf of issues that that come up, and I want to advocate on behalf of specific mariner cases. Jason's been kind enough to bring a few cases to my attention already, and I will certainly look at those issues, try and offer advice to those seafarers when I can, and in appropriate circumstances, engage on the behalf with owners, operators, flag states, et cetera, who the appropriate body is. I can take it as far as that. I personally will not be taking the case to litigation. If there's a scenario where a seafarer is in a situation that actually needs to go litigation, I can't take it that far. There's only one of me, and litigation obviously becomes very time consuming. If I'm fortunate enough to be able to locate an attorney that would take the case pro bono, I may be able to make that connection. That's not something guaranteed each time, but we do sometimes have success where we identify a seafarer that has an issue that would benefit from an attorney and we're unable to resolve it short of litigation. I'm sure to look to see if there's an attorney that might be able to take that case pro bono and move it out from there. Jason, that's kind of what I have as my brief introductory comments. I think you have some questions you have queued up for me, and I'm certainly happy to entertain those now.
I do. Thank you so much, Phil, for those remarks. I'm looking forward to, after your unexpected 30 years in the Coast Guard. Now there's another chance for another 30 years here at in Seafarers welfare. So I have a couple questions, but I also note that at this time, anyone listening on the call, if you'd like to pop a question into the question box, you can do so already. Or very soon, I'll be asking you if anyone would like to raise their hand. I can open your microphone as well. A question, Phil. You're transitioning out of the Coast Guard right now, transitioning out of being part of a government agency into seafarers welfare work, and I'm wondering, what's your perspective on how you'll move forward, being that perhaps the Coast Guard sometimes, certainly CBP sometimes, might be on the other side of a question or a debate about seafarers welfare. Lots of us have really found it challenging sometimes where CBP might be doing things that we perceive to be actually against seafarers welfare, or sort of make grief for seafarers. And I'm just wondering, what's your perspective on that? How will you work with the folks who used to be your employer but now might be on the other side of might be on the other side of the table?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Jason. Now, like I mentioned, the Coast Guard was kind enough to send me to law school. Yeah, I graduated law school back in 1999, so I practiced law for over 20 years. And one of the things they teach you early on in law school is to be able to identify both sides of an issue and argue both sides of the issue. That's part of the training, and it's one of the things that we do in the Coast Guard, at least on the criminal law side. We often might have an opportunity to spend time on the prosecution side or the defense side throughout our Coast Guard career, and have to learn to argue from a different perspective. So I think for kind of a threshold point is, my professional training has trained me to always look at both sides of the issue, not just the issue I'm currently on, and then be prepared to advocate on that other issue. So it's consistent with my professional training. As far as how I kind of see the world, the Coast Guard has a host of attorneys that work for the Coast Guard. And then on top of that, they also have a host of attorneys that work for the Department of Justice that will advocate on behalf of the Coast Guard's interests when it gets to kind of a litigation type situation. Same with CBP. When I think about the seafarer welfare organizations and the amount of legal resources that are at their disposal, it's not quite as robust as what the U.S. government has at their disposal. So I go with clear conscience that when there are times that the seafarer mariner advocacy issues are not in alignment with that of the U.S. Coast Guard or CBP or the United States government, you can trust I will be a zealous advocate on behalf of the seafarers, because there are plenty of folks on the other side of the fence that are going to be prepared to advocate for the other position. With that said, it's been my experience that, for the most part, the Coast Guard, CBP, and the U.S. government as a whole don't typically take actions with the intention of negatively impacting seafarers and mariners. That's usually not the desire or the intent of the action. I mean, that might be a kind of oddball scenario here and there that someone might be able to figure out, well, that's not true. It's normally where these federal entities, or in some cases, United States state entities, are taking actions that they feel they're required to take out of certain statutory or regulatory reasons that having negative impacts on seafarers and mariners. And once we bring it to their attention, they will often, if they have the discretion, try to modify their actions in a way that will relieve those negative impacts on seafarers and mariners. Now, sometimes they don't have the discretion. They might feel that there's a statutory regulatory requirement that's driving them to take certain actions. And in those scenarios, that's an opportunity for me to advocate too. If there's a regulation that is having a negative impact on the mariners, then that's a regulation that we can work to try and have modified. And that's kind of a great example of that. Here in the United States, post 9/11, there were various regulations put in place to improve vessel and port security. And an unintended consequence of those new security regulations was that seafarer welfare organizations were having a harder time having access to ships and also have a harder time getting seafarers off ships to visit them. It just as part of the security requirement. And the regulations at that time didn't give a whole lot of teeth for the Coast Guard to force these facilities to allow people to have access to their facilities. So this complaint came up over and over again, and the Coast Guard was certainly trying to use the power of persuasion to tell these different facilities to give people access, but that was not having the desired effect. So the Coast Guard ultimately did modify the regulations to relieve that with improvements. I'm not saying it's perfect. It certainly improved access across these secure facilities due to that regulatory change. Regulations take time. These are quick fixes, but we need to advocate for those changes if we're going to accomplish those changes. So long and short, I think my familiarity with the federal bureaucracy, and it is a bureaucracy, will help me advocate on behalf of seafarers. I do know some of the current players and intend to keep current with that. So when we have an issue, hopefully they'll see me as somebody that will usually will speak truth to power and will advocate on behalf of the seafarers, and then I'll get a fair reception on the side because, you know, my past experience with the Coast Guard, at least I'm somebody known to them, coming to them.
My next question, and my last question before I open it up to others, and we've already have a few questions. If you have a question lined up, you can also raise your hand. You work for the Center for Mariner Advocacy of the Seamen's Church Institute. That it's a church-affiliated organization. So many on the call right now are working for maritime missions, working for all the different denominational groups that make up maritime ministry. From your perspective, why is that link important? That you're working for a church-affiliated organization, and that you're working with maritime missions?
Sure. Well, first I'll say that if there are folks out there who are advocating on behalf of seafarers who are not associated with some type of denomination, Christian or otherwise, I'm still happy to help advance seafarer interests, for sure. But why do I enjoy the fact that I'm associated with an organization that comes from a Christian background, that I have as a resource chaplains that work for SCI or other organizations that when a seafarer needs something beyond what I can do, if there's just a hunger for kind of that meeting them at a ministerial level, we have those resources available too. And for organizations that are not associated with church, they don't have that as readily accessible to them as I do. Having chaplains at SCI or other organizations that I know and work collaboratively with, when this, if a seafarer has lost a loved one and you just can see that they're struggling with that loss while they're in a foreign port, or maybe they lost one of their shipmates and they're struggling with that, having somebody who can minister to them on that level, beyond kind of the seafarers' rights issues or maritime advocacy issues, I think is just really important to meet people there. A lot of the seafarers right now, through this COVID crisis, are dealing with kind of the mental health issues of being stuck on vessels for extended periods of time. There are things I can do to advocate on behalf to try and relieve them being stuck on that vessel. But I'm certainly not as equipped as well as the chaplains are to minister for them on a kind of a mental health type level. And it doesn't need to be, it doesn't always certainly need to be sharing the word of Christ if you're Christian, or if they're a different denomination, sharing that with somebody who doesn't need that right now. It could just be being that minister who knows how to listen to them, show compassion with them, and then if they want it, pray with them. So I think it's really valuable, Jason, that we do have that ability to bring both advocacy for the mariners as well as an opportunity to minister to them both physically and mentally and emotionally.
Thank you so much, Phil. Now the opportunity to open up the lines and ask others if they have any questions. If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand and I can open up your microphone. We do have one or two questions coming in on the chat, and also some folks raising their hand. The first one I see is Ricardo from Barcelona. Ricardo, I'm opening up your line and asking you to unmute yourself. You'll have to unmute yourself if you'd like to say something. Ricardo, I believe you are live now. Hello, Ricardo.
Hello, do you listen to me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Okay, because I had some problems with PC, so I am speaking now through my iPhone.
Perfect. If you could say who you are and where you're from, and then your question.
Okay, well, I am Deacon Ricardo from Barcelona. I have not a real now a question. I mean, it's nice to listen to Phil. Is he the successor of Doug Stevenson?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so it's now because I knew Doug for many years, and we have also in Barcelona a small center for seafarer rights. It's just at the Spanish level, but we have two lawyers, volunteer lawyers, and when we have some problem on board the ship, some legal problem, then they give advice, and well, we try that the seafarer knows what he can do or what he cannot do, and sometimes we also put him in contact with other organizations or other people that can help me. But in any case, also through our website, we get some questions, usually from seafarers that were disembarking because of some accident or some illness, and afterwards, when they are at home, they find that they get not the assistance they expected. So this is, but I repeat, this was for me now a fast connection. I have not a special question, just to my greetings to Phil, and to hope that in the future we can meet.
That sounds great, Ricardo. I look forward to that. And if there's ever a seafarer rights issue that you need assistance with, please, my contact information is up there. Send me an email. I'm certainly happy to collaborate with you in any way we can.
Well, thank you, Ricardo, for the comment. And indeed, Ricardo and Doug had worked together for very many years together, so on different projects. Anyone else like to ask a question? If you can raise your hand, and I can acknowledge you and put you on. I have Mary Davidson. If you can unmute yourself. Hello, Mary. If you could say where you're from and who you are, and ask your question.
Hi, Jason. Can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. Mary Davidson, and I'm the director of the Baltimore International Seafarers Center, East Coast US. So like, I guess a lot of centers, we primarily deal with foreign crews on cargo ships. But I had a brand new experience a few weeks ago where a man called from a USNS, which I think is US Navy support ship. It's like a non-commissioned Navy ship. And we were never able to visit them for security reasons. Once in a long while prior to COVID, one of them would drop by our center. There are several that are docked long-term in Baltimore. So anyway, this man told a story, gave an account which boiled down to that he had lost his job because of racial discrimination. I think he was pretty upset when he called, talking very fast. He hung up before we could really talk about whether he wanted me to do anything. I think he just wanted someone to talk to, and I think he may have thought I was SIU. We get a union, which we get a lot. But I was wondering for future reference, if I had another call like that where someone actually does want me to follow up or refer in some way, is this something that would come under CMA or not?
Yeah, you know, Mary, you could certainly, I'd certainly be happy to chat with that seafarer about his issues and try and help identify the issues for him. As you certainly are aware, since based here in the United States, we do have 50 different states, and to practice law in a state, you need to be licensed in that state. So for example, if this, and for the benefit of this call, I'm licensed in the state of Virginia. So if somebody happened to have a seafarer issue and they were based in Virginia, I could actually advocate on behalf of that mariner for state law issues. Now, Maryland, I'm not licensed in Maryland. So if he was based out of Maryland, I could identify some initial issues, see how strong the evidence was. I'm certainly aware of the issues, and then help him make a decision of whether or not he needs to seek legal advice. I mean, certainly if he was fired for racial reasons, there are legal remedies to that. And it doesn't even need to go under what you consider the kind of the classic seafarer rights issue. That's just against U.S. law. So there'd be the question is, how strong is his evidence of that? What evidence does he have to support the firing was for racial reasons other than some other legitimate reason? And that's often challenging, even if it is a legitimate complaint, even if that really was the reason for the fire. The question is, how good is the evidence that was substantiate that was a reason for the fire? And I can certainly help identify that for the individual.
Thank you very much, Mary, for the question. Next, Willy Wittig. I'm opening up the line. Willy, if you can unmute yourself. Hello, Willy, if you can say your name, where you're from, and your question.
Hello, Jason. First of all, thank you for arranging this webinar, and thank you to Phil for an excellent presentation. I'm Willy Wittig. I'm with the Bremen University of Applied Science, where we educate, amongst others, also future seafarers. And I'm on the board of both the International and the German Shipmasters Association, and one of the IMO Goodwill Maritime Ambassadors. My question would be, considering what we have seen over the last little more than a year by now in the maritime industry, with all the travel restrictions and the seafarers being locked up on board for extensive period of time, some even as long as some 15 to 18 months. What, from the point of view of the existing conventions and regulations, what has to be changed, and how can we actually approach these changes in order to avoid similar thing to happen again in 1, 2, 3 years time, when the next problem with a similar dimension arrives in the world?
Well, I think that's the kind of the $1 million question is what do we do to put more teeth behind the various international instruments that already say some of the activities that are going on are wrong. I'll give you an example of one that I think would be nice to have prohibited in some fashion is a no crew change clause that charters have been putting in the charter agreements. Right now, while I think it's morally wrong, it's not against the law. It's not against some convention. And that certainly has exacerbated some of the crew change challenges where a vessel might be in a port where it might be able to facilitate a crew change, but it has a no crew change clause in the charter agreement. So they can't make the crew change there. And then when they offload that cargo at another port, maybe that port is not as friendly for crew change. So that's at least one scenario that I'm aware of. I think there are probably others where we need to look at that. Jason and I participated in a call a couple of weeks ago now, where it discussed that the legal committee at IMO is planning to take up the issue of port state control guidelines for seafarer abandonment. And the reason I think that is important is right now, typically where crews are abandoned, they're abandoned in a port state, and there are not any kind of mandatory advisory guidelines right now for what that port state should do. All the responsibilities are the owner, the operator, the flag state, but probably the country with the most power over the situation is a port state, and right now there's not guidelines there. So I do think, and those here that have worked with IMO, if legal committees begin to start work on that this summer, we're probably talking best case scenario 5 years before we see anything happen. And even that's moving pretty fast because typically they do some of the central legal committee work on it. And then once they finally have something that they like that needs to get ratified. So this isn't a quick fix, but we need to first at least identify potential fix. I certainly think having stronger requirements of port states and identifying issues like the no crew change clause on a charter agreement, we need to identify those issues and see where it might make sense to address them. As I say right now, Willie, I don't think there's a silver bullet, but we need to find those different areas where we can strengthen international instruments and maybe make the repercussions for not fulfilling those obligations stronger. And I'm certainly open to suggestions on that. So for those on here that have an opportunity to deal with, if you see an area where it doesn't even appear that there's any international instrument that covers it, please bring it to my attention. Again, I don't think it's going to be effective to try and engage an ILO or IMO to change the international instruments while still in the pandemic. I just think it'd be too emotional. I'm not going to be there. But to start identifying those issues, so once we get past the pandemic, we can kind of fix these things going forward. I certainly think that makes sense to do, and not to say, well, we're through the pandemic, let's forget about it. We need to identify the shortfalls on the international instruments and start working to fix them going forward.
So Willie might have a follow-up question, but just to note, right now, Chaplain Kempton Baldridge has said that he's a chaplain with Seamen's Church Institute, has written that SCI has a 24/7 hotline at 1-800-708-1998 that will connect with one of our 50+ chaplains who can then refer him to legal counsel. Thank you, Chaplain Kempton. And also from Margaret Massibo, a story, but also perhaps a question behind this, one of the major issues of this past year, seafarer abandonment. Margaret writes, we have a ship that has been in the port of Mombasa since September 2019. Seafarers from Syria, they're still here. What should be done to help them? What can we do about that case or seafarer abandonment in general?
Yeah, Margaret, the one threshold question is, what is making it hard for them to be repatriated? Is it a repatriation issue? Is it an abandonment issue? They've been there since September 2019 because, and then that's the part I don't know yet. So what needs to be done to help them is first kind of need to know what's causing them to be stuck there. So the contact information is up there, the CMA at seamanschurch.org. That's probably a deeper conversation than we should have on this call. But if you'd be so kind as to email me the details, as much detail as you have, and anybody else is involved, so I can kind of unwind that, maybe I can help give you some advice on how we might be able to get them some relief. Okay, abandoned by the owner.
Margaret has just texted that they've been abandoned by the owner. So yeah, Margaret, I encourage you to write to Phil, cma@seamanschurch.org, with more information on that particular case. But Phil, what do you think can be done in general about the issue of abandonment? 2020 was a record year, at least according to the ILO database, for abandonments. This issue should have gone away. I mean, it should have gone down. We thought we were sort of going in the direction of it going away, but yet, very unfortunately, has gone up. Do you have any comments or thoughts on what we could do, perhaps collectively, to bring attention to it and do something about this terrible issue?
Yeah, I certainly think that highlighting the importance of it is worthwhile. And on the short term, bringing these cases to the forefront and trying to get those people with responsibilities to fulfill their responsibilities, we can certainly do that. There are legal remedies in some scenarios. So we need to explore how practical those are, how much value is in the vessel, how easy is it to seize a vessel, to arrest the vessel in that port, and then try and get a judgment against the vessel and have the vessel sold, and then those proceeds pay the seafarers a wage and repatriate back. So there are sometimes legal remedies that might be appropriate in some circumstances. They don't work all the time. The vessel might not have enough value to make that make sense, or there might be burdens to get in a court that challenge that. But Jason, I think I mentioned previously the legal committee has looked at these port state control guidelines for abandonment. Now, that doesn't exist today, but for those that have an opportunity to engage or influence the activities at IMO, to let it be known that that is something that you are very supportive of, and trying to make those guidelines as strong for the seafarer as possible, and move them to as much of it can be mandatory as possible. Again, I don't know what it's going to look like, but the more these guidelines are mandatory as opposed to advisory, and the more teeth they have in them, if that port state had obligations for these seafarers, that would be nice to have a remedy from a government entity that's right there in the port. Right now, they do not. The port states don't have an obligation. So I see that as another tool in the tool bag. And I don't think there'll be any tool that will be a one size fits all that will respond to every seafarer abandonment issue. But the more tools we have in the tool bag, the more resources I have, the more potential responsible parties between the flag state, the owner, the operator, the port state, the more potential people that can intervene on behalf of these seafarers, I think improves the odds of getting a favorable resolution for them. So, Jason, if there was a silver bullet, we would solve this. And I do think that the MLC 2006 has improved the world for sure. But as these cases continue to pop up, it hasn't fixed it for sure.
I believe Willy Wittig had a follow-up question. Willy, I've opened your line again. If you have a follow-up question, you can unmute yourself. Hello, Willy. Maybe not. Anyone else have a question or comment at this time? Oh, there is Willy. Hello, Willy.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find the micro switch. Sorry about that.
No problem. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for the previous question, Phil, but I would like to come back to the problem.
I'm sorry, Willy.
We lost you, Willy.
I think we lost you again. I can't hear your microphone. Are you there, Willy? Sorry about that. Well, I will have to mute you, and hopefully, if maybe your internet is disrupted, we'll come back to you. Anyone else now? Anyone else like to raise their hand, ask a question? Phil is available. Please do pop in the question box or or raise your hand.
And also circle back to Willie, if we don't close the loop on this call, if you're not able to get back in, please email me and we can continue the conversation via email. And certainly if we need to chat, we can have a phone call too. But for starters, if you're not able to get back into this conversation, please email me with the follow-on question, and I'll certainly get back to you.
I'm going to try to just open up Willie one more time. Willie, are you there? I guess it's not working. Perhaps his internet is down. Phil, a question from my part. You were a captain of the port for some time. Sometimes when Seafarers Ministries sort of raise their hand and ask questions of the captain of the port or of the Coast Guard, feels like we're outsiders and we're kind of sort of intruding on the daily work of the Coast Guard, and you know, we feel like we're taking up the time of the Coast Guard or bothering them. I'm wondering, from you having experience from the Coast Guard, how in general does the Coast Guard, captains of the port, view maritime ministries? And did you ever have conversations with your colleagues about in various places about how maritime ministries are viewed, and what would your counsel be, to your advice be, to sort of raise our profile or raise our voice among the Coast Guard in the United States?
Sure. Well, Jason, captains of port are people, just like all people. So it's you know, they're varying personalities, and some people might be have different focuses, and so I can't say there's one size fits all. I can say that, you know, my experience, my personal experience as the captain for New Orleans, was that I was very open to meeting with seafarer welfare organizations. In fact, you know, attended some of sometimes had a luncheon for the one of the local seafarer welfare organizations here in the New Orleans area, and I would attend that luncheon and then entertain questions there, and let them get to know me, and I try and get to know them better. And yeah, it's been my experience that regardless of what it is that an organization does, the best time to get to know each other is prior to meeting each other. Meaning that whether it's lunch, coffee, or meet and greet, having the opportunity to meet with the captain of port where you operate, when you don't need to meet each other, then get to know each other. So that when a scenario comes up where a seafarer mariner is being negatively impacted in some way, and you need the assistance of whether it's a CBP director or a captain of port, you're a known entity coming to talk to them, somebody that they met over lunch or over coffee, and you have that rapport built up with that person. And I think the opportunity for that to be a successful engagement increases dramatically if you've kind of laid that foundation. And I think while certainly the different federal and state officials that are engaged in the activities that might impact our mariners are all busy, if you are flexible on the time and persistent in trying to meet them, you will have an opportunity to meet them in that kind of informal meeting ahead of time. And I think that's time well spent.
Thank you very much for that. That's 2 emails now everyone has to write. One is to Phil to introduce themselves, cma@seamenschurch.org, and also write your captain of the port. Write to your harbor master, write to the others that are in charge of your port. Well, we still have a few minutes left in this. Are there any last burning questions that people would like to ask? I think potentially Willie has rejoined our call. Willie, if you still have your question, you can raise your hand again. He just wrote to me that his internet connection did break up when he was asking his last connection. Willie, if you would like to ask, there we go. I'll open your, there you go. Hello, Willie, welcome back.
Thank you, Jason, and sorry for the technical trouble. The question I was going to ask was a follow-up to my previous question. Taking the present situation and knowing that we have the nasty virus being around for quite some significant time, also over the next couple of months, and depending on how the mutations develop, it might be even longer. So, and looking on the situation of the seafarers who got stranded, one example for that is in Hamburg, we have now quite a large community of seafarers from the Kiribati Islands who are staying there because they're not able or not allowed, to be precise, to fly home. Their own country doesn't allow them to get into the country again. Seeing other seafarers who got stuck on board their ships for extensive period of time, and also looking at the situation that even in severe circumstances, such as seafarers falling ill while being on board, sometimes even under such circumstances, it was not being permitted to them to actually go ashore to see a doctor or a hospital. So, and there are many of such cases being reported. So I know it is a lengthy process to go through the systems of IMO and ILO, but what we probably need to discuss is, and I do not have an answer to that, otherwise I wouldn't be asking, but what we have to discuss and to really be concerned about is what can we as individuals, we as representatives of organizations, we as representatives of organizations also being having a seat at the IMO, what can we do in order to start the process on the level of the ILO, on the level of the IMO, or on the national level to avoid similar things to happen, not in the far distant future, but also most likely in the very near future. That is, from my point of view, something which is not just a fiction, but can happen any other day, any other week in the coming months.
Yeah, Willie, and you know, it's there's a good and bad thing. I mean, the bad thing is it's that we have widespread impacts on seafarers because of the complications COVID has caused, and so that's a bad thing. The good side effect of that bad thing is that there is a wide recognition at ILO, IMO, and various governments have come out and spoken often in different written instruments, basically bringing this kind of these negative issues to light and imploring nations, owners, and operators to take steps to mitigate those impacts on seafarers with varying degrees of success. I think the reality that we're dealing with is that while we're still in the midst of a pandemic, nations are going to act what they think is in their best interest to minimize the impact of the pandemic on their country. And as we have new strains of the virus coming out, some that are more contagious, some that might be vaccine resistant, this again is causing challenges as people attempt to create crew changes, because again, nations start clamping down the borders, and that just complicates our crew change process, which exacerbates the situation you're talking about, you know, somebody not able to get home because of some crew change scenario. And once that happens, that crew change becomes hard, then charters want to put in their no crew change clause in their charter because they don't want their cargo stuck in a port while they're trying to make the crew change. They're interested in getting their cargo to where it's supposed to be. And owners want their vessels to continue to sail, so they're willing to give the charter agreement, the charter hirers, the charter clause they want because they want their vessels to be hired. So I think people will continue to act generally in their best interests. what we need to continue to advocate for, and I think it's accurate, is that it's in everybody's best interests to ensure that maritime commerce continues to move. Maritime commerce obviously is essential to the working of the world nowadays. And for maritime commerce to work, seafarers need to be able to do their job. And to do their job, they need to have some reasonable crew rotation. As we keep seafarers stuck on ships for a longer period of time, there's no doubt that fatigue kicks in and mental health issues kick in, and that negatively impacts their ability to do the job and to safely navigate around the world. And that's not good for any of us. So we'll need to continue to communicate that. And I think people are communicating that. Is that going to fix the scenario in and of itself? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to. Then as we become aware of individual situations, we'll need to hit as many of those as we can. And it's, for those familiar with the term, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. We have one hammer and there's hundreds of moles popping up. There's only so many can whack, but we need to just keep on whacking as hard as we can. And I'm looking forward to getting this. I don't know if I should say look forward to it, but I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to try and weigh in on the Seafarer Abandonment issue that's going on since September 2019. Is there a solution? I don't know, but I want to at least help work on that. Jason and I chatted about some seafarers that are having a tough time getting back to Kiribati, and we did some work on that. It's not solved yet, but it's been improved. We talked about some seafarers whose the operating company kind of changed their seafarer employment agreement and was adversely impacting them. That is, that they ended up requiring them to pay for the quarantine period themselves, while the original agreement would not have done that. We advocate on behalf of those seafarers with the operator, and the operator ultimately did change the position and paid for those seafarers. But that's one case amongst literally thousands. So it's unfortunately that there is no silver bullet. I think we need to advocate on behalf of those mariners, meet them, and minister to them as best we can to kind of relieve the mental health issues through ministering to them, and then capture what issues are causing these challenges so that once we move through the pandemic, we can then try and fix them going forward. I don't think we're going to fix them, Willie, in the middle of the pandemic. I think the best we can do is continue to do what we're doing, advocate on behalf of them, and try to get people to act in a socially responsible fashion, because really it is ultimately in their best interest, and better educate them to the negative impacts will happen if maritime commerce ceases to function in a meaningful way. The negative impacts for everybody is just would be. I think we can all see how catastrophic that would be, and that we need to start operating in the best interests of all of ourselves. And to do that, we need to make sure we're taking care of our mariners. So there's many different ways we can get that message across. We need to continue to bang that drum, but I don't expect that to fix this scenario. I just think it'll mitigate the impacts. And then to improve it, we need to adjust the international instruments so they actually have ramifications for those folks that more significant ramifications for those folks that don't fulfill their obligation on the international instruments. But I don't think we're going to meaningfully accomplish that while we're in the middle of the pandemic. I just think there's too much of a headwind and too many issues to deal with that we're not going to make those changes in international instruments while we're still in the middle of the pandemic.
Well, Phil, thank you so very much for your time in this past hour. Thank you for spending the time with us to meet and greet you, and also to hear your perspective on a few of the burning issues that are happening. So, folks, you have Phil's email address, cma@seamanschurch.org. You have also a telephone number on the screen. I encourage you all, even just to say hello, write to Phil and get to know him before the crisis, as he said, before you need him, get to know him now, and reach out to him so he can learn more about your work as well. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this, this panel. This will be the first in a series of presentations. The next one will be on the last Thursday of the month of February, and After that, each month we'll have either one guest or multiple guests on a panel to discuss seafarers' welfare and the key issues of seafarers' welfare. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Phil.